Welcome once again, everybody, to Irish Sports Daily Power Hour. I'm your host, Mike Frank, here with Jamie Uyeyama, and we're going to talk some Irish football recruiting today, maybe a little bit of Irish football as well. Before we get going, wanted to mention great time to sign up for Irish Sports Daily. You can go to the front page and click on the premium section and sign up for a premium subscription today. There's a lot going on with Notre Dame recruiting and more decisions to be made. And then, of course, we're only essentially a month away from football kicking off here, and I realize the games aren't for 2 months, but we have fall camp and everything that's going to go on with that. Also wanted to mention that we will not have a power hour next week. I'll be off on vacation, and so we won't be dealing with that next week. Possibly the week after. I'm not sure if I will be back in time to do that, and we'll have to figure that out. But definitely next week is out. Also, wanted to mention our sponsor, which is ESQ Clothing. ESQ has been making the best handmade custom suits, sport coats, tuxedos, and shirts for the last decade. It has been featured on GQ, ESPN Today, USA Today, and you've seen them dressing your favorite players and coaches. ESQ only gets the best fabric from Italy and England's top mills with over 40,000 fabrics to choose from. You're guaranteed to look your best. Go visit esqclothing.com and book your appointment. Mention ISD and get 10% off your entire purchase. Yama, let's dive into it. There's certainly a lot going on with recruiting right now. Ian Premer being the latest commitment. I think we felt like there's a good chance. I don't think we felt like Premer would decide before Jacobson. So kind of a surprise in that regard, but certainly a good surprise. This is the top-ranked tight end they were recruiting, and a guy they've been recruiting from the very, very beginning, and this is the type of player that you're wanting if you're trying to make that next step and become a national championship winning team. And so, Ian Premer, what do you like about his film, and what do you think he brings to the table?
Well, I mean, he's a special athlete. Like anyone who's seen his basketball highlights, I mean, he could legit play, Division I college basketball, right? He averages like over 20 a game and over 11 boards, and he's like an above the rim guy. He's 6'6", 220, and he could throw it down. He's a big time athlete, like explosive athlete. And, at that size, to be that kind of athlete, and I think there's a lot of, like, you watch him in terms of some of the stuff that he does, and here he's like returning a kick here, and just obviously just being superior to the guys that he's going against and running through tackles and all that. You see him do things, and in a lot of ways, I think he's very similar to Michael Mayer, except for he's just bigger and more explosive in that way too. So I think there's a lot of him where you see kind of Eli Reardon-ish, like that, but he's better than what Eli was at this same time, and really kind of like has that versatility that Mayer had. He has a chance to be like a first round pick, like as good as any tight end in college football. He's like an exceptional guy. And obviously we're very high on Preston Friesel too. And I think Friesel is a more polished receiver, definitely a more polished receiver, and, super talented, great ball skills, great body control. But I mean, Premer, I think, is just on a different plane as an athlete. And I mean, to me, a true top 50 kid in the class.
Yeah, I just think, you're looking at some elite athletic traits here. A guy can do so many different things. I mean, they show him playing running back here, and just his ability to turn left and right for a guy that size is kind of unique. And I just totally understand why Notre Dame was very, very high on this guy and wanted him in the class. And I think the complement between him and Friesel is really good. They're different types of players, and now it gets to the position of what happens with Jacobson, the other tight end that they've been recruiting. And, I know that there's a lot of questions about what they should do with Evan Jacobson. I I can see a case for taking the guy because he is more of an inline blocker, and I think that they need that type of guy. Although I do think James Flanagan's going to be a very good inline blocker as well. He brings a nasty that I don't think you see from a lot of guys, and so I think as an inline blocker, he's going to be a dominant player, and they're excited about that. And he's also going to be a good receiver out of the backfield. But you do want more kind of inline blockers as well at times when you're trying to get big and run some power. And so I can see an argument being made for that. And I think a lot of people are like, well, don't take him. Um, I think that Notre Dame sees a value in taking him. I'm just not sure they will at this point because they're going to take 5 receivers most likely. They've taken 6 offensive linemen. And I think that decision will be made pretty quickly here as to whether they ultimately end up taking him or not. And, I think we'll probably hear something in the next couple days as far as, whether Evan Jacobson is still a target for Notre Dame or not, whether he's still interested in Notre Dame. I know that conversations are still ongoing, so I'm not exactly sure what's going to happen with that when it's all said and done. But I mean, I could see an argument to take the guy. I'm just not sure that I would, especially when you consider Jamie a lot of the 2027 tight ends, like all their top guys they offered from Pot of Gold Day. Pretty much every one of them has already been on campus. Some of them multiple times, which says a lot about their interest. And we talked before, Jamie, about how it looked like Notre Dame was struggling a little bit in this class, for tight ends. And one of the reasons was they didn't get a bunch of them on campus like they normally do in Irish Invasion and in camp. And therefore, it wasn't as sure or as obvious what was going to happen there. Obviously, Harris Piven and Mike Denbrock did a great job of recruiting these guys and getting both Premer and Freisel and who knows, maybe even Jacobson. But the fact that so many of those guys from 2027 have come and have visited and has shown strong interest, I don't know, man. I'm not sure I would take them because I look at some of those 2027 guys and they're different types of players. Some of those guys are elite athletes, and I think they have a good chance to get some of those guys. So your thoughts here?
Yeah, I think that part of it, the 2027 kids, because you might want to take, in terms of just like the level of talent, you might want to take 2 in that class.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
you have to kind of weigh whether or not, like, taking a second guy in that class, would you rather have Jacobson or would you rather have a second guy there? And I know that Jacobson, like you said, there's an argument to take him because he's different than these other guys. And he is definitely more advanced in line and probably a guy who, would help in line sooner in his career in that sense. But I'm not sure. Like, I mean, Freisel just has to obviously physically develop and all that, but I think he's a guy who could block in line and be like decent at the very least. I think Premer has a chance, like he's gonna be huge. Premer's gonna be huge, and I think he could be really, really good in line too. So I just don't know if that's like the best use of that scholarship to do that. I mean, if it was different and you flipped it and Premer was still out there, then I think, yes, he is that kind of level of talent where you do make an exception for that. I'm not sure if that would be the best move when you think about, like, would they be better off getting like another defensive lineman or another receiver or, whatnot, right? Like, I just don't know, taking 3 tight ends in the same class. Because then there's just going to be a log jam, and are all those guys going to stay anyway? So I don't know. That's the way I kind of see it. I completely agree. There could be an argument for take him. It's not like wouldn't be a horrible thing to take him. I just see more, if we're going pros and cons, I see more of an advantage to not take a third tight end, and it's nothing against Jacobson as a prospect.
I think the fact that I shouldn't say fact, but the potential that we're just not sure whether Frizel's going to grow big enough, and with the jump from where Premer is as far as competition goes, he's got some body development to do as well. Because those are somewhat uncertain at this point, I could see more of a case to take a third just to make sure. But I personally would probably ride with those guys because I do like the 2027 guys a lot. And if you take 3, you're going to have a really hard time not only getting 2 if you like 2 next year, but you may have a hard time getting 1 of your top guys
Yeah,
because they're
agree with
like,
that.
this is a logjam in front of us. And, we don't want to have to compete with 3 guys that are just a year in front of me. So you do have to be smart about that. And I think it could hurt you trying to land your very top guy next year if you take that. And so I'm sure there's going to be conversations and we'll see what happens. But there's an argument to be had either way, and we'll go from there. Another guy deciding today, and it's a 2027 guy, Jamie, and that is Ellis McGaskins, and linebacker from Alabama, has been on campus, had a lot of very positive things to say about Notre Dame. I think that there's a real solid chance they could land this guy. And if they do, what do you think it says about them accepting his commitment so early? And then 2, I know you've watched the film. I've watched the film. What are your thoughts on him as a player if he does choose Notre Dame?
Well, I think in terms of the big picture of what it means early is they see him as like a top guy. Like they see him as one of those guys that they wouldn't say no to at this point. And I think to me, leading into kind of what he is as a prospect, I think that makes sense. Like there's a reason why he has, Michigan, Miami, Ohio State, Texas A&M, etc. Like he's got big time offers, right? He's got like pretty much
Penn State,
most
Florida,
of Penn State, Florida. Yeah. He's pretty much got all, it's just blue bloods the whole way. And that's it kind of fits exactly, with what you see on the film. He's like incredibly productive. The guy's had, triple digit tackles as a freshman and a sophomore. Like he's like been a dominant player in high school football, making like a ton of plays, like over 30 tackles for loss in his 2 years. And you could just see it too. Like he is a very good linebacker, very good against, the inside run game, really good instincts, great recognition, just a guy who triggers very fast, plays downhill, violent, like will hit through guys. I think he's someone that, if you look at him, he's not, if the only kind of knock on him really is like size and how big he's going to get. Cause I don't think he's ever going to be, he could be like 230, 235, possibly, but he's probably never going to be like 240, but they don't play. They don't want guys at 240, right? They don't want guys there. And I think if you look at so many guys especially at the college football level, that are, that kind of size, his size, who he's like, just barely kind of like, he's 6 feet, he's 211 right now. He's going to be like 225, 230 ish, whatever. I imagine that's what he's going to end up at. But there's so many guys who have been that, like JD Bertrand is an example of that. And he's a better prospect than JD Bertrand.
Yeah, by far. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think, if you were going to compare him to guys, he's more in that kind of like Jeremiah Trotter. I don't know if he'll be Roquan Smith, if he's quite going to be that, but just in terms of guys that are like that size that end up being like
Smell Mondone, the guy, the other Georgia linebacker. Yes.
Another guy. Yeah. Another guy. Right. Georgia's had plenty of those kind of linebackers, right? That guys, are like, yeah. And because they're like, they value guys who are just good linebackers. They're not just looking for guys who are 6'4" and have all the athletic traits. They want guys who can play ball. And This is a guy who plays ball. He looks like, or Nick Bolton, another guy who's at Missouri, was an all SEC linebacker. Same kind of thing, right? He's like 6 feet tall, 76-inch wingspan. Not the hugest guy, but man, is he a heck of a football player and just violent and physical. And I think that's the same kind of thing that McGaskin is. So I think if you're, there's other guys, you wouldn't want to take like multiple guys that are like him in the same class, just in terms of size, because you don't want to have a ton of guys who are just 6 feet. But like, to me, his other traits more than kind of make up for that. And there's just been too many, the history of guys like that. There's a lot of guys like that where it's those inches, particularly at inside linebacker, don't matter as much.
Me personally, I really like his film, and it's for the things that you say, and I think that that's why they're taking him more than anything. We know that he's not the biggest guy. We know that he's not the longest or the heaviest guy. So the only reason you would take this guy is if you really believe in his ability to find the football, his ability to dissect the play, and his ability to get small, shoot through gaps, and make negative plays. And you got 2 years of him just absolutely dominating. And Jimmy, we've watched a lot of linebackers in the past that, yeah, once they get running, they look fast, right? Once they, make the tackle, they look like everything you want. But they just don't have that immediate boom, instinct, see ball, go get ball. I know where this play is going. And there's very few that have that kind of innate ability that can recognize plays very, very quickly. And that's the thing that stood out to me more than anything in watching this film is it's immediate. He knows exactly what to do immediately. And there are only so many players like that. And I think that, Jamie, we've talked before about how linebackers very, very difficult to evaluate because a lot of guys have the body types and the size and they have the athleticism, but they don't have what it takes up here. And that's where I think that you can see this and they recognize it. And then, I'm sure Max got him on the board and they watched a bunch of film and I'm sure this is the type of kid that really shined. And so if he chooses Notre Dame, I think this is a big pickup. And again, I don't think that they'd offer him and take his commitment this early if they didn't really like him, because again, he's not the biggest, he's not the strongest, and he's not the fastest. He's just a very good player, and you don't turn down guys who have that kind of instincts. And so I think that that's what you're looking for, and I'm very excited about that.
And sorry, just to add on to it, how many guys from the state of Alabama that are this level of prospect does Notre Dame get on campus early, and then this guy wants to go to Notre Dame? That is a rare thing. That's the heart of SEC country, and you're going in and you mention all the offers that he has. It's rare, and that also, if they land him, it's a big sign that of like how things are changing. That on top of what they're doing in this class.
Yeah, and this class is going to get better as we anticipate. Speaking of which, Kadon Finley announces July 4th. Devin Fitzgerald announces July 5th. And Braden Robinson now is announcing July 6th. I have a strong feeling Notre Dame's going to go 3 for 3 on that. If that were to happen and they get all three of those guys, where do you rank this as far as a class goes? And I like seeing that, Fitzgerald had a big weekend and made a bunch of plays and became an MVP. I think he's really underrated. I think he's going to be, somebody who's really going to surprise when he gets up here. And again, I think he's another great house type of player. I think he's a guy that's just going to just continue to get better and better. And I really like his film. Of course, I love Kadon Finley, and we've already talked about Robinson, what he brings. But when you consider the two that they already have, plus this, is this, I don't want to say a home run, but is it, at least a triple, or what do you think here?
Yeah, I'd call it a triple. I mean, I think you would say like you would like if they had maybe one more just super top end guy that out of those 5, I think that would probably make it a home run. But I think when you're looking like 1 to 5, the quality of the guys that they have and like kind of like the different traits that those guys have, like speed and size and ball skills and all of these kind of things, like those are 5 guys who, obviously not all of them are going to hit. It never works out like that, but I mean, at least a couple of them are going to hit and be very good players, right? And if not more than that, right? So, and if you look at where Notre Dame was at for much of the last like 5 years, really 5 years, right? Like probably even longer than that, really, because you can go through most of Del Alexander's classes and most of Chancey Stuckey too, because even though that Chancey Stuckey class, which had Greathouse and Flores and Braylon James, and people were excited about that and the ranking. I mean, James and Flores were out, so they were out after 1 year. So they never got to see the fruits of what those guys could become, and maybe they weren't actually the best fits at Notre Dame. Period. And where I think that these guys are better fits for Notre Dame, and just the number of those guys, like it just in terms of just blue chip guys and how many of that is, like that's Notre Dame has desperately needed that. They desperately need that. And I think it's going to like upgrade the receiver room in a way where maybe they took a couple guys in the portal this year, and I think both those guys could end up being really, really good for them, but they don't need to be in a position where they're taking 2 or 3 guys in the portal every year. Hopefully they're in a better position where if they want to go out and get one, go out and get one for sure. But to rely on having to get 2 or 3 guys and then you don't know how those guys are going to fit and it's a new and all that, I think it's much better to have sign these kind of classes and not worry about that in the future.
I think too, it's going to be a lot easier to land a Malachi Fields, a Ben Skoranek, those types of boundary receivers who may be kind of maxed out as far as, their NFL potential. Either they have some potential or it's lower round potential, but yet can be very productive football players. I don't think you're going to be able to find in the future in the portal a lot of guys, who can run 10, 300 meters, who can, stretch the field vertically, and you can get a lot of big plays out of. I think that's going to be harder and harder to find in the portal because the way wide receiver is valued so much in the NFL that if you can play, you're going to be gone, especially if you can run, because that's what they're looking for. And so, again, I think if you're going to miss, boundary is probably the position that you have a better chance of overcoming than, say, some of the others. And if you look at Notre Dame's history in the portal, that's the types of players that, one, they've been able to attract, and two, have been pretty productive for Notre Dame, even though they may not have been a first-round draft pick after the fact. So I think you have to look at it in that regard. And then, Jamie, just what's going to happen here with this, because now you have somebody like a Kadon Finley, who is a great receiver, runs fantastic routes, but also has the ability to get vertical. You got Bubba Frazier, who can play the slot and have the feet to really make a big problem for any slot corner or safety that's out there trying to cover him, but also could potentially play a field position, get vertical that way. You've got Robinson, you've got Faison, you've got all these guys who have the ability to get vertical. And oh, by the way, now we also have a tight end in Freisel who can get vertical, and another one in Premer who can get vertical. And by the way, we're starting to now have quarterbacks who can throw the ball vertical and make those types of plays. And how much is that going to open up the offense? I think if there's anything that has really hurt Notre Dame in the last 10 years, maybe even longer, probably going back to the Ian Book days, Notre Dame's just not been able to consistently throw the ball downfield and challenge safeties in that we can't keep creeping up to stop the run. We have to be worried about these guys going over the top, and we have to be worried about that tight end screaming down the seam, right down the middle as I'm trying to crash in on this run, or I'm falling fake to some bubble screen they may be trying to set up, and then they go vertical with the tight end. Just the fact that you have this ability now to stretch the field and a quarterback who can get it to him. I mean, I just think that's going to open up the offense in ways that I don't think a lot of Irish fans understand, that when you have the ability to do this now you start getting the big plays. And I think back to the Penn State game. I think back to the Ohio State game where Notre Dame was struggling to move the ball at all until they started taking chances and throwing it to Greathouse deep down the field. And as soon as they did that, all of a sudden Notre Dame's offense looked like they could play with anybody. And now you start to have that kind of consistency with that. That's when things open up in the offense. And so I'm really excited about what this can be. And, the way they've recruited on defense, I think it's going to maintain the level of talent and productivity that they've had, and probably get even better, defensively. And certainly offensively, I think that they're going to be considerably better based off of the guys they've recruited. Your thoughts here?
Yeah, I just think they're going to be faster in general, and I think that's the thing, because we can even talk about the running back position. Where both those guys have the potential to take the distance, and obviously they got that already on the roster. So it's not like they don't have that, but they're going to have to replace Price and Love after this year, and I don't think that the other guys that are going to be back from the team next year aren't as, I would say, like potential home run hitters as much. Like I know Aeneas Williams had like a 60-something yard run against Army last year, but he's not really like, I would consider him like a in the same category as Price or Love. And then I don't know what Keatron Young, I mean, at 242 pounds, I don't know what he's going to be. Nolan James, I mean, we'll see, right? Because I would say that would be maybe the one question, although he did look, I mean, he hit a lot of home runs as a senior in high school, but I just think just throughout, like, they're just more athletic. They're just more athletic than they have been in a lot of other classes. And that's like kind of, if you were going to say, like, what's the theme of the class on offense at skill position, is just like better athletes just throughout, right? Because you could make an argument and would say, like, well, I don't know if they should take Robinson or they should take a fifth receiver or that. And like, well, that he can run, he can fly. And that's why maybe you're not going to say no to that, because all it takes is one play for that guy to just, turn a game. And that's with a lot of these guys.
Well, we mentioned it with Harrison last week. Jaden Harrison really didn't do much, and then all of a sudden he made two absolutely huge plays in the playoffs, and probably more than two. He made a couple nice catches too that really impacted the games. And so I think you take a chance on a guy like Robinson just because he could be something, and he could be something that, if he wasn't such a developed receiver, like a guy who really can run routes and really does have good hands and has shown it over and over. I mean, if you watch his highlight film, it's long. He had over 1,500 yards in receiving last year, and you don't get that by, just catching the ball 3 or 4 times. You have to catch the ball a lot. So he's a guy that is advanced as a receiver in that, he has a lot of productivity. If you're taking him as a guy that just could be that guy, like we've talked about in the past, and Abdur Rahman, in the past, that really had none of that experience, that's kind of a stretch or whatever. This guy has already proven it. And so, you're feeling pretty good about that. I mean, Jamie, I sit here and I think, and I still am just kind of chuckling about us a few weeks ago. And they could get every damn one of these guys. They really could. I mean, my guess is Jacobson still wants to come. Otherwise, he'd just choose Iowa State or Kansas State at this point. I think the only reason he hasn't done that is because Notre Dame hasn't given him the okay, and I'm not sure that they will. I think that they're going to get the three guys that we mentioned, and I think they're going to get Elijah Golden as well. I mean, they could have closed with every damn one of these guys. That's impossible. I'm just
It does
blown
seem
away.
impossible,
It does seem impossible, doesn't it? It's never happened that I can remember.
They're making it happen. Yeah,
I know. Unbelievable. Greg, you want to chime in?
So I just had a question then, like looking over everything, because they're not going to have a power hour next week, and there's going to be some commitments coming up from the wide receivers, obviously, and then you got Nick Reddish coming up, and then Elijah Golden on the 26th. Like,
yeah.
And I put on the kind of the thumbnail, like, is it a top 5 class? And obviously there's the rankings piece of that, where it's like, is it literally top 5? But I think similar in recruiting, where it's like, you have to rank players sometimes. Like sometimes I think like a top 100, top 50 caliber player is what it is, kind of wherever. Like Osborne to me, right? He's ranked 134, I think, on 247 composite. But like, you could look at him. It's like that's a top 100 caliber player, right? Like there can be more than 100 top 100 caliber players. Like there can be more kind of top 5 caliber classes. I'm wondering if you guys have a feel for like, this is a top 5 class wherever it kind of falls in the ranking, right? Because now you're talking about points and composite scores, and like it can get pushed down, right? But just in the spirit of the types of players that Notre Dame is bringing into you guys, is this like a true top 5 caliber class? Because you can kind of jimmy the system in ways that, like, you can get a top 5 class without truly being in that kind of realm. Just wondering where you guys kind of fall on that.
Me personally, I would say yes, and the reason I would say yes is because it's twofold. One, I think that they'll get the players that'll eventually be very close to that. But the most important thing to me is, who did this staff want, and did they land those guys? And in the past, that wasn't as important to me because I didn't think that those coaches and some of the people doing the evaluations were as good as the guys that they have right now. I mean, we have seen them take guys and then just develop them very, very quickly into very good players. And so to me, I look at who did they really want and how many of those guys did they really get? And, obviously you look at defensive back and you're like, wow. You look at running back and you're like, wow. Even an offensive line, while they didn't get an Boko, I really think that Makio Tom gives you 2 options to have a guy just as good as that guy. I really think that they have the athleticism, the same type of athleticism and potential as Boko does. And you now have 2 options versus the 1. So, an offensive line, I think it was a very successful thing. What if I liked a couple other players? Yeah, maybe, but that's not the way it works. And this was not a great offensive line class. You look at tight end, and from where it was to what they ended up with, I mean, it's hard to argue that you could have done any better than that. The linebacker was never going to be a big thing for them this year, but the 2 that they got are 2 guys they identified very, very early in the process, offered them, wanted them. And so you got to feel pretty good about that. And, with wide receiver, it was always going to be a difficult sell. It's always going to be, because you haven't produced any good wide receivers in a while. The numbers are just not there in your favor. And you don't have like the Pied Piper quarterback that you can point to that is proven right now and say, this is the guy, right? This is the guy that you're going to be throwing to you. So it was always going to be difficult to get that guy, to get, like a whole bunch of elite receivers. But what I do think, if they land those 5 they got guys that I really believe have the ability to be developed into maybe a number 1 type of player out of these 5, but certainly a whole lot of number 2s and number 3s for sure. I really think that there's a lot of number 2s in this class. And I think that there's a bunch of guys who could be number 2s in last class, as well as maybe a number 1 as well. So that's the way I look at it. And we'll see what happens. Your thoughts?
Well, I think that if you're going to say, like you said, the guys that they looked at as priorities for a long, long time, like Thalen Finley and Golden, those guys were like top of the board guys for them for the longest time. So those are huge, huge wins. And obviously, like a Premer and a Rodney Dunham, like those types of kids, like those are guys that I think in any class, Joey O'Brien, Corey Adams, like those are guys in any class, they'll look and you'll be like, wow, you get one of those guys and you're thrilled, and you get four of them. And because to me, all those guys are like kind of Greg said, in terms of caliber, I think that's the way to kind of look at it. It's like all those guys are top 50 caliber prospects. And there isn't a spot where I don't think that they really like missed in a way, like where if you look at, say, the 2013 class, which was a top 5 class, and it had some, obviously it had some great players in it, like Jalen Smith and McGlinchey ended up being a top 10 pick, and Will Fuller was one of the best receivers Notre Dame has had in the last 20 years, and Rochelle's a good player. A bunch of guys are multi-year starters in there too, but they only had 5 NFL draft picks from that group, right? There's a couple other guys like Cole Luke and Onawalu who, were solid players for Notre Dame for sure, but didn't end up getting picked. But that's not kind of what you expect at a top 5 class. You have, more than 5 NFL picks there. And I mean, I would be shocked if this class produces only 5 NFL guys, and NFL
totally.
draft picks out of it. Like, I think, there's going to be a lot of guys who play in the league, and then a lot of other guys who are like contributors. So like even the thing with, the offensive line, I wouldn't say this is anywhere close to like Notre Dame's best offensive line haul in a long time. No. But I think if you look at like the tackles and Makio and Tom, I think you're taking 2 guys that have extremely high ceilings, and I think probably one of them is going to hit big, maybe 2, but like at least one of them is going to hit big. And then I look at the other 4 guys. Yeah, not all those guys are going to play, but probably 2 of them are going to end up being pretty good players, for Notre Dame. And in any class, if you get 4 guys in the offensive line, 3 or 4 guys in the offensive line that end up playing for you, that's a good class. And like, I think, it's kind of the same thing throughout, where you look at those receivers. Yeah, not all 5 are gonna hit, but I bet at least 2 are gonna be really, really good for Notre Dame. And at the receiver, right? So it's the same kind of thing, right? And like at back at one of those tight ends is going to be a stud, maybe both, right? And I love the defensive line class. Like, I love the defensive line class and what they're doing there. And I mean, I wouldn't say like I'm like over the moon in terms of the linebacker class comparatively to a couple of the other ones they have, but it's still they're good. Like I like Clapper a lot, and I think Thomas Davis Jr. has a chance to be a really good player too. So I just think overall, they're going to have like, it's a lot of high floor kids and a bunch of kids with super high ceilings. And there isn't any position where I think, man, they really whiffed. Like they whiffed here. And I don't like, the chances of them getting hits here. The percentage of them having a lot, like a really high hit rate with a lot of these guys, especially given what we've seen with the staff and what they've done and developed, and the way that, like you said, Mike, the way the staff is evaluated too, and finding like the right guys who are fits within the culture, and how many of these guys have committed and said like the culture was like a big part of why they decided on Notre Dame. So I really like, what they've done with the class. And to me, it is absolutely like, I don't care. It finishes 7th, 8th, whatever. If they land all the guys that they're supposed to here at the end and keep all the rest of the guys in the class, to me, it's, it's a great class.
I agree. And I think what says it to me more than anything is a lot of classes in the past, Aiden Pouncey would be like one of the top 2 guys in the entire class, in my opinion.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, he would be. He's just that athletic and that talented. And if he were in last year's class, I'd like him. I think he would as a player, his upside would be higher than any other of the defensive backs that they signed last year. You may disagree with me on that, and I'm sure Greg will because of his Dallas Golden, man love. But for me, I just think Aiden Pouncey has his ceiling is just tremendous, and yet they have Kari Adams and Joey O'Brien in the same class. I mean, that's just crazy to think about. So I love this class. I just love everything about it. And the other thing that I like about it is I like that the fact that a lot of these guys, I feel, chose Notre Dame because they are attracted to the culture that Notre Dame has. And that's huge because like there are some guys you bring in and you got to mold them to the culture. They may be, I want to be the star or whatever. And you got to kind of mold them to that culture. All these guys, I believe, chose Notre Dame because of the culture and what it is. And that to me means they're going to fit in very, very well, want to stick around and hopefully be happy, productive football players. You're not going to find many productive football players that are unhappy with where they're at. They don't like their surroundings. They don't like the team they're on. They don't like their coaches. You're not going to find very many unhappy players that are productive. And so I think that that's very important, is making sure that you get guys who want to be at Notre Dame for the right reasons. All right. We got a bunch of questions for Power Hours. We're never going to get through all these. And that's okay. We'll get to them at some point. Like Jaboski, who we all love, wants to know our top 5 2027 guys. I mean, I've watched probably 40 of them, but I haven't watched everyone, but I've probably watched 40 of them. And, so I don't want to say because I could probably be missing somebody, but, I've watched a bunch. I think in the next probably month or so, Jamie and I will probably dig a lot deeper into the 2027 class now that, the 2026 class is going to be done. But it's too early for me to really say. I know a lot of people want to know about summer workouts. I prefer to keep that as for our premium paid customers. And so, I know Matt and I have been talking about that, and we'll try and get something together. But I think we're going to post that on the premium message board versus doing it here on the show. All right. Let's see. With the McGaskins kid likely committing tomorrow, putting yourself in Freeman's shoes, how would you handle these 27 recruitments in terms of when you push for them to commit? I'm not saying that people shouldn't be excited when he pops at all, but it was with 17, 18 months until he signs with only one sophomore film available. It seems like a really tough balancing act. On one hand, you don't want to push a kid to slow down and eventually lose him, but you also have to have but there's a small amount of data compared to what you would have in November and October. Well, I certainly agree with that. But I think that they take this kid for the reasons we said. I don't think that they would take the kid if he does commit to Notre Dame unless they really believed in him, because as we mentioned, they just don't have the size or length. And so the only reason you would take the kid right now is if you really liked what you saw on film. Anything you want to add to that, Jamie?
Yeah, I think it is a balancing act with all of that in terms of, what you have going forward. And you don't want to take guys, too early. But I think for the most part, they're not going to take too many of those guys. And the guys that they have offered, a lot of the guys that are in on are really elite guys. It's guys that they see as elite guys for the most part. And also they haven't been shy about telling guys to be well, it's going to be tough for you in the future too. So I think that kind of changes it because it's not the same as it was before. But I mean, in saying that, I don't think it'll ever be a problem where they're going to take a bunch of guys they only have sophomore film on and not get enough there, like especially with McGaskins, because I mean, when you have that kind of production in
2 years
as a freshman in 2 years, like dominant, and that amount of film out there, it's different than another guy who's like, well, he was a backup and we really like his size and we really like his, he tested well and all this. It's like, it's a little different.
Yeah. I agree. Let's see. Do you believe ND is making this mistake by not recruiting a third defensive tackle, third defensive end, and third linebacker? With D tackle and especially D end, ND generally did not recruit those positions well in 2023, 24, 25. If Elijah Golden does not commit to Notre Dame, our 26 defensive tackle recruiting is a really bad spot. I think it was a huge mistake to stop recruiting Dre Quinn, Noah Clark, Samote, Koatanga, Braden Jones, Mikhail Blade, Xavier Griffin-Haynes. My thoughts on this are I don't think it was a mistake. First of all, I firmly believe that Elijah Golden will choose Notre Dame. I think that they're in a great spot for him. So I don't think it's going to matter as much at defensive tackle. But like Dre Quinn, I think Notre Dame felt like he was going to be a defensive tackle. I think that they felt he was going to grow into a defensive tackle. With Noah Clark, I think Noah Clark told them that he was not likely to leave the area because he was so close with his family. So you can keep recruiting the kid all you want, but if the kid flat tells you that, what are you going to do? I mean, you're wasting your time. With Kotanga, I mean, look, I'm sure Notre Dame would revisit that if he was open to it, but I think they have a pretty good class and they like where they're at with the guys that they have. And, if the guy happened to reach out, I'm sure that they would definitely consider it. But, Mikhail Blade, we've discussed, has had knee injuries and people are not sure how good he is at this point because of those knee injuries. Braden Jones, again, I think he was a good, solid player, but he's not Ronnie Dunham. He's not. And, Xavier Griffin-Haynes, I think, is probably going to grow into a defensive tackle as well. But, potentially could play a defensive, strong side defensive end. But that's just the way I see it. I think that's just kind of the way the class unfolded. Would have I liked to have another surefire 220-pound, 6'4" dominant pass rusher? Of course I would. Everybody would love to have that. But everybody would love to have Ronnie Dunham too. You know what I mean? So, Notre Dame's in a good situation here. Your thoughts?
I just got to jump in here too, is that they did bad at those positions. I mean, last time I checked, they had Drake Bowen, Jaden Osbury, KVA, Matt Fermo, all these guys just signed. They have those first three guys have already played and been good.
What about Bryce Young?
I mean, Bryce Young, Boubacar Traore.
Exactly.
I mean, Chris Burgess looks like he's going to be pretty good. I'm certainly a fan of Dom Hulak and what he can be. I think at defensive tackle, you can certainly say you could make an argument for them. Hey, they didn't do what they wanted, but I think it also says probably that they like some of the young guys on the roster and what they think they can be, because believe me, if they didn't think that, Mukum or Cole Mullins or, Seviano, if those guys were going to be guys who could play for them, they would be taking more guys I think without a doubt, they would have made it a priority to get a third defensive tackle in this class.
I think the biggest thing that people don't realize is I think they felt like they were going to get either Vallejo or Kari Wilder, and they felt like they had Vallejo wrapped up. And so they went into this situation thinking that that's where they were. They felt like they had Vallejo, and if they weren't going to get him, they had a great shot at Kari Wilder. And so, they felt like, well, we'll get one of those two. And we still have Elijah Golden, who, is going to be a defensive tackle. So, if we strike out on those two, we still have Elijah Golden, who we feel like we're going to get. And let's be honest. I know this for a fact. They were struggling, like, even when Dre Quinn was still a possibility, they were like, well, look, are we going to take this other offensive lineman, or are we going to take a fifth defensive lineman? Are we going to take a third tight end? There were a lot of questions about what to do. And so I feel like they felt like they were in such a good spot at defensive line that with this class that they could not push as hard on some of these others. And, sometimes that works out, sometimes it doesn't. But I still think that this is the best defensive line class, especially if and when Golden signs, which I believe he will. This is the best one I've seen at Notre Dame, and I can't even remember for how long. So very, very excited to see it. Besides quarterback, for obvious reasons, who's the one player on offense and one player on defense who you are most excited to receive reports on before Miami? He says he's very high on Faison and Rubio. I don't know. Who are you most excited to hear about once this all gets going?
Like in camp, I mean, I'm definitely excited to hear like where Faison's at, because obviously he didn't really have much of the spring because of lacrosse again. And I do think, I mean, he showed some good stuff as a sophomore, but it didn't feel like he only slightly built on what he had as a freshman. And I still think there's a lot left there. So I would say him and Fields, certainly, because of, we've heard a lot of good stuff this summer, but Will Pauling too, because he didn't really have much of a spring. So those are the guys on offense. It's just receiver in general, I would say. And then I think for defense, to me, it's Boubacar Traore, because he wasn't available in the spring. And if he looks like the same guy that he was prior to the injury in camp, I mean, that's going to be scary for other teams, because I think I'm already very confident that Bryce Young has already taken a leap, and Traore, I think, has a chance to be very special. So, and was playing really, really well before he got injured. So that would be my guy on defense.
Yeah, for me, I think, from my understanding, I feel like Notre Dame feels very confident in Malachi Fields, Pauling, Greathouse, and Faison. I feel like Notre Dame feels like they've got 4 receivers they know are going to have a big year and dominate. So for me, what I'm going to be most intrigued about is who's the 5th guy, because I do think you're going to need at least 5 that is going to come out. Who's the 5th guy that's going to rise to the occasion, because they need another one for sure. And if they get injuries, they'll need even more than the 5th guy. They'll need a 6th. So that 5 and 6 role are going to be really important, I think, for the success of the season. Defensively, I agree with you 100% that Traore's got to be the guy. Because we know that Junior's going to be, Botello is going to be banged up for a while and not be able to participate. It also kind of surprised me, Logan Thomas. I don't know about these weights that were released, but that was a very low number for Logan Thomas on the weight side. And, he's not going to be somebody you need to hold up there for, first and second down, and he'll probably only play on third down. But what happens if Traore gets hurt? Then you're going to have to play Logan Thomas a lot. And so to me, I do think Traore is going to be important, and they got to keep him healthy. But the other thing that stands out to me is what happens at that other safety position. Is it going to be Stroman? Is it going to be Tay Johnson? Who else is going to be in the race there? Is it going to be Luke Tolich? So that to me, I think, is the other kind of big question mark as far as what's going to happen there, and we'll have to see how it all unfolds and what it all means. All right, let's see what other questions we have here. All right. This is a good question. Who do you think is the most underrated contributor to last year's team? Someone who made a big contribution but got very little credit. That's a good question. What do you think there, Jamie?
I thought this was a really good question, and I think it's Josh Burnham. One, because they had all those injuries at defensive end. He's a guy who had to play both spots. He had to play both end spots. Obviously, he didn't contribute a ton as a pass rusher, but he played really good versus the run. And if you watch that highlight reel that Notre Dame put out, and they've been doing it for each position, right, where they put 5 minutes of defensive line making plays, and it's just guys returning from last year. And same thing, they just did a thing with the linebackers. Josh Burnham made a lot of plays. First of all, he's second on the team in tackles for loss. And he's just a guy who plays, first of all, he plays really hard, is a very good run defender. He has to be a better, has to develop more as a pass rusher. I think he's got, the skill set to do that. Maybe never be like a dominant guy, but definitely be better than he is. And I think partly because Tui Halamaka got, a lot credit because people weren't expecting it as much from him. So, and then he obviously had some big moments, but Burnham's kind of had a lot of moments that were kind of piled up on, but maybe they or kept compiling them and people didn't maybe take as much notice of it. And I thought he played, pretty well.
Mine's a little bit different. It's on the offensive side of the ball. And I know some people will disagree because he did get some credit, and that's Aeneas Williams. I've kind of gone back and rewatched a lot of the games because I get bored in the summer. And Jamie, the guy just made big plays at big times. I mean, he made some huge, absolutely huge plays at big times. And when you have a Jeremiah Love and you have a JD Price, it's really hard to stand out, especially on third down when a lot of times you're just picking up the blitz. You don't get thrown the ball as much as you would like. You don't get the carry as much as you'd like. But when that kid was given opportunities, he made some very big, key, clutch plays. And the fact that they even had him in the game at those key moments really says a lot about how much they trust him. But I think he was underrated. I think the role that he did was a lot bigger and more important than people realize. So that's who I would go with. All right,
it's a great pick too.
I got one from the chat. I thought this was really good from CFB Hertz. Even more under the radar, Rod Hurd had some sneaky big plays. I thought he, especially in the Louisville game when Ben Morrison went out for a couple of series and he had to come in and be the nickel because Jordan Clark had to go out and be the corner. Like he made some really big plays in the Louisville game, which obviously very important for them. It's pivotal at the time. And also like the fact that he came in thinking that he would have a much bigger role than Don Schuler, obviously bumped up and he had a really good season. But the fact that he was able to hang in there, have a very key role on the very good defense when he thought the role would be bigger, I thought that was key. Like he obviously had that matchup against Tyler Warren in the Orange Bowl as well. So that was big. So I thought that was good from CSB Hertz.
All right. This is another interesting question I saw here. Do you think play action versus straight drop back rate will go up this season for how good of a running team Notre Dame is? The play action rate was criminally low. What do you think there, Jamie?
I don't know why, but Mike Denbrock that's been his MO. He hasn't been a heavy play action guy. If you look at LSU, and obviously they were an extremely explosive passing offense, they had about the exact same similar rate of play action. And you would think that last year, based on how Notre Dame was a team and how the way teams played Notre Dame, that they would have had a much higher play action rate, but it doesn't seem. I think it's more of a Mike Denbrock thing and of how he kind of calls the game. So maybe it goes up slightly, but I don't think that all of a sudden they're, Notre Dame's just going to be the super heavy play action team, because I think one of the things with Mike Denbrock is he's a lot more of like pre-snap motion and doing that kind of thing to set things up rather than play action in terms of like scheming up plays.
One thing I know about Denbrock is he puts a high priority on seeing it. You know, he wants his quarterback to see it, and sometimes when you're dealing with play action and things like that, your mind isn't as on seeing it because you're worried about executing the play fake and things like that. So because you got a new quarterback too, I think they're probably going to want to get their new quarterback as good a look as they can when they are deciding to throw the football. So that's going to take some of that play action, I think, away because they want to make sure that whoever is making those decisions has plenty of time to make the right decisions. And because it'll be new to them, it's going to be probably not as quick as somebody who's been around and done it for a long time. All right, let's take one more. This is a good question. My wife and I were talking about the worst losses in a nutshell. Which game would you consider to be worse? The first time we lost to Navy or the NIU game, and how the season ended doesn't matter. Well, those are certainly two good losses, two of the worst that I can remember.
They're pretty bad, both.
Yeah. The only one I would say was probably worse, and people won't like this, but I think that UConn loss where they played who was the quarterback that was at Notre Dame and
Zach
transferred
Frazier.
out. Yeah, and Zach Frazier beat Notre Dame. That was a terrible loss. They had no business losing that game at all. Zero chance, and did. But I thought that was just as bad a loss as any of these others, just because of the pure ridiculousness of it all. But anyway, I don't know. What do you think on this one?
I mean, losing to Syracuse, that Syracuse team, the other year there was horrendous as well. I'm going to say that I still think Navy, when they had beaten them, whatever, it was like 47 times in a row. I know that team stunk. Like Notre Dame's team stunk. It was I mean, it's the worst Notre
absolutely.
Dame team that I ever watched since I've been a fan. It was terrible. But still, they just had no business losing that game. And that was like at a time too, where I know Navy was getting better at that time. They still shouldn't have lost that game. It was that would just added to the darkness of the whole, that year. And probably, I mean, look, we just named the UConn and the Syracuse. Charlie Weiss, can't lose. You can't have 3 of the worst losses of the last 30 something years on your resume. Yeah. That's pretty bad.
Well, the interesting too was, because I know for a fact that Weiss never wanted Zach Frazier. He inherited him, didn't want him. Based off everything I heard, did everything he could to get him out of the class, and then he transfers, and it's like you just saw that one coming. You just knew it was going to happen. That one of the last losses that he has is going against the quarterback that really had no business beating him and still did. And I like Zach Frazier. He was a nice kid. So it was actually kind of a chuckling moment for me when it was all said and done. But yeah, the weird thing was, I think with that Navy game, we all felt like that could happen, right? I mean, I think going into that game, because of how bad they were, we all felt like, oh man, they could actually lose to Navy, and did. With that NIU loss, I don't think anybody thought there was a prayer in hell that they'd lose that game. You know what I mean? None of us thought that. I mean, we thought Marshall probably wouldn't happen, but it was also, first time head coach. But we thought because of what happened at Marshall, it couldn't possibly happen at NIU.
Again,
yeah, and sure enough, it did. So I think that was just the more surprising of it. That was certainly, I think that, and probably that South Florida game where the game started like 4 different times, and Notre Dame had 4 different opportunities to come out and play worth the damn, and they were terrible all 4 times out the gate. I mean, wasn't that was that the Dane Chris fumble at the line of scrimmage? Is that when that happened? Or so that's kind of the beginning of the end. Yeah.
They fumbled going into the end zone. I think it was Jonas Gray who fumbled. I think he was I was ugly. It was bad.
Yeah, it was. It was a horrible loss. So,
Yeah.
all right.
Things are a lot
right,
better
folks.
now.
Yeah, they certainly are. You know, we're celebrating the fact that they may close out with every single guy that they ever wanted, you know, at the end of recruiting, which I can't ever remember happening. And so very, very excited about the future of Notre Dame football. All right. Once again, folks, wanted to mention we won't have a show next week. So happy 4th to everybody. Have a good time. Pretty soon, Jamie's going to be celebrating that with us because we're taking over Canada here pretty soon. And he's going to be the. Aren't you excited about that, Jamie?
Well, we'll see. We'll see how it goes.
Are you picking up a gun? Are we going to have to fight? Is this how this is going to go?
I don't know. We'll see.
All right. Happy 4th, everybody. I hope you all have a great time. And we'll be back soon with Power Hour. Thanks for listening. Stay safe out there. Don't blow yourself up. I've seen some terrible things, and I've participated in some very suspect behavior on 4th of July. Let me just say that. Some very, very suspect behavior, and somehow I survived. So I wish you all the same luck as well. All right. Thanks for listening, folks. We will talk to you not next week, in a couple weeks here on Power Hour. Thanks for listening.